Hi, welcome back. Today we'll be listening to Chapter 6 from the book Nothing's Fair in 5th Grade, and this chapter is called Fat Girls Can't Dance. Follow along as I read. School was the same when I got back. Mrs. Hanson was still strict. Jack was well again and throwing crayons. Elsie was back too, fat as ever. The school was having a yearly cleanup campaign. We drew Don't Litter posters in the morning. In the afternoon, our class had to clean up the south playfield. Mrs. Hanson said Marianne, Elsie, Jack, and I were to go to the library instead of picking up litter. She said it was too chilly outside for us. Jack sat in the back of the library. Marianne and I chose a front table. Elsie plopped herself in the middle chair, which meant Marianne and I had to move our chairs out to give her body room. Elsie read a library book. Marianne and I were struggling with our arithmetic assignment. After a while, Marianne said, "I just can't get this junk." Elsie stopped reading. "I'll show you how, if you want me to." "I sure do," Marianne agreed. I pretended to be working while I listened to Elsie explain the problems to Marianne. She certainly could teach better than my mother. Elsie turned my way and offered to help me too. "I don't need a thief helping me," I told her. Marianne leaned over toward me. "Jenny, you could forget about that." "Do you want to forget about it?" I asked. "She owes you a lunch." "Elsie, when are you going to pay everyone back?" "When I get the money," Elsie replied. "What about your allowance?" "I don't get any," Elsie said. "I bet." "You really don't get an allowance?" Marianne asked. "No, I don't," Elsie answered. "You just sit and stuff your mouth," I put in. "Oh," Marianne murmured. The rest of the time in the library, Elsie kept her nose in her library book and pulled on her hair. I still couldn't do the fractions. Mrs. Hanson took us to gym 3 days a week, but on Tuesdays and Fridays, Mr. Marshall, the school PE teacher, took us. It was a lot more fun with Mr. Marshall. To make us eager to come to PE, Mr. Marshall usually told us about the next week's lesson. But when he announced we were going to start folk dancing, we weren't eager. Some of the boys complained about being made to dance. "You'll love it," Mr. Marshall told them. "You'll love it. How do you think a running back learns to make those swivel turns?" The boys were not convinced. Whenever we chose sides for baseball or basketball, the good athletes and the popular kids are chosen first. The kids who can't throw a ball have to stand around for last picks. When we chose partners for square dancing, you can imagine where that left Elsie. "Come on, Elsie," Mr. Marshall said cheerfully. "You be my partner." He never let her get out of PE like Mrs. Hanson did. First, Mr. Marshall taught us how to alamonade left. Then he told us to watch Elsie and him do a do-si-do. Mr. Marshall is very tall, and when Elsie skipped toward him, she looked like a beach ball rolling toward a flagpole. Jack and Lester laughed so hard they fell down. Mr. Marshall stopped everything. "Jack," Mr. Marshall said, "do you like people to laugh at you?" "No," Jack said. "Lester," Mr. Marshall said, "do you like people to laugh at you?" "I guess not," Lester said. "Don't you know?" "Yes. No, I don't like it." Lester fumbled around with his belt. "Look at me." "Lester, Jack." The boys looked at him. "If you don't like people to laugh at you, then don't you make fun of other people." We went on with the folk dancing. Elsie still looked ridiculous and plenty miserable, but no one dared to laugh. We did folk dancing for 3 weeks. I guess Elsie's diet was finally working. She didn't have much choice except to keep to it. Unfortunately, her mother didn't buy her new clothes or fix the old ones. While she danced, she kept hitching up her pants. When she bowed to her partner, her blouse went up and her pants slipped down, showing her blubbery back. Jack said she looked like a hog ready for slaughter, but he only said that when we got back to Mrs. Hansen's room. Mrs. Hansen worked on our report cards at her desk. It was March and about that time again. I was worried. I knew I couldn't even get a C in arithmetic because of fractions. I'd never had a bad report card before. The morning of the day report cards came out, Mrs. Hansen called each of us to her desk. She wanted us to look at the report card and discuss it with her if we didn't think it was fair. If some kid complained, Mrs. Hansen wrote down all his scores and asked him to average them. No one objected to a grade unless it was a real mistake. Nobody wanted to do all that math for nothing. When I got called up to her desk, I was scared, but still hoping for a miracle. I didn't get a miracle. I got a D-, 2 A's, 3 B's, and a lousy D-. Diane wrote a note asking me what I got. Elsie was the next one called up. I didn't really see what happened. I was too busy writing a note back to Diane telling her I was going to get killed when I got home. What jerked me out of my note writing were the yells and laughter and Mrs. Hansen saying over and over, "May I please have your attention? May I please have your attention?" I looked to the front of the room and saw Elsie frantically pulling up her skirt over her white underpants. I poked Roy in the back. "What's going on? Is this some kind of a strip tease?" Roy could only shake his head. He was laughing so hard tears wobbled in his eyes. I turned to Diane. "What's going on?" When Elsie stood up, her skirt fell off. Diane answered me. And then Jack let out a whoop. This did it for Mrs. Hansen. She got her pee whistle out of her desk and blew it sharply. The room quieted. "This is absolutely enough. I am ashamed of this class. Elsie?" But it was too late to say anything to Elsie. She bunched the top of her skirt with one hand and pulled the classroom door with the other. The door slammed behind her. "Take out your arithmetic books and do page 360. Mrs. Hansen ordered. Page 360 was in the back of the book with solid pages of exercises. "The whole page?" Roy asked. "The whole page," Mrs. Hansen said firmly. Slowly, we all took out our books and paper and pencils. Diane stared at Mrs. Hansen hatefully. She just likes to see us work. "For talking, you may do page 360 and page 361, Diane," Mrs. Hansen told her. I could see Diane draw air into her chest, getting ready to object, but the cross look on Mrs. Hansen's face changed her mind. Page 360 was solid multiplication, 2 numbers times 4 numbers. It was going to take all day. I hadn't even seen what happened, and I had to do 42 problems. Mrs. Hansen gave me a pain. When I was on problem 3, she tapped me on the shoulder. "Jennifer, will you please go to the girls' lavatory and see if Elsie is all right?" she whispered to me. Elsie was slumped against the wall at the end of the sinks. Her head was tipped back and her face tilted up. Tears were streaming from her eyes, but she didn't bother to brush them away. One hand hung at her skirt. The other still clutched her skirt. She looked sad and hopeless and alone. I had never thought of Elsie as a human being, just a fat girl. "Are you okay?" I asked her. "Mrs. Hansen wanted me to see if you're okay." Elsie closed her eyes. The tears dripped from under her eyelids. I stood there for a while. "I'll go get a safety pin from Mrs. Hansen so you can pin up your skirt." Elsie didn't answer. The classroom was silent. Everyone's head was bent over an arithmetic book. I tipped up to Mrs. Hansen's desk. "Can I have a safety pin for Elsie's skirt?" "Certainly," she said, and messed around in her top drawer until she found one. When I returned to Elsie, she still had her eyes closed. I held out the pin. "Here, you can fix your skirt." Elsie didn't seem to hear. She slid down the wall to the floor and sat there in a huge lump, her head drooping over her lap, tears falling onto her skirt. I went into one of the stalls, came out, and fiddled with my hair in the mirror. She was still crying. I sat down on the floor beside her. "Elsie, it isn't that bad." "What do you care?" she asked. "Well, I don't want to see you cry." "Then get out of here." "No, hey, Elsie, come on. Let's fix your skirt." I reached for her hand. She pulled it away. "What do you care, Jennifer? Everyone likes you." "Some people like you too." "Who?" "Well, your mother and your sister and your friends." "Not my mother, not my sister, and I don't have any friends." Elsie wiped her nose with her arm. I got her a paper towel. "Somebody liked you once." "No, they didn't. One person. Once my daddy did. That was 5 years ago." I searched around in my head for something encouraging. "The kids will forget about this in a couple of days." "So what?" Elsie's tears started coming again. "They all hate me. You hate me too." "No, I don't, Elsie. I did, but I don't now. I guess I didn't think about your having feelings." Elsie's mouth drooped down on both sides. She stared ahead of her at the stall doors. I couldn't think of anything more to say. There was no point in trying to lie to her and say all the kids would learn to like her, because they didn't, and they wouldn't, and she knew it. Elsie heaved a shuddering sigh. "None of it matters anyway. I'll only be at this school a couple more months." "Is your family moving away?" "No, I am." "How come?" "Because the principal said I could just stay till the end of the school year on probation, and my mother doesn't want me anyway, so she's sending me to a boarding school next fall." "Maybe if you're good, she'll change her mind." "No, she won't. She wrote for all the boarding school pamphlets after I got caught with the licorice whips." She could still change her mind. Elsie didn't bother to answer. We sat there beside each other silently. "Elsie," I said, "I'll be your friend." She turned her head slowly to look at me. "What for?" "Because I want to." "Why do you want a thief for a friend? Why do you want a fat slob who sits and stuffs her face?" "I'm sorry I said those things. Can we be friends?" I smiled cheerfully at her. She did not smile back. "As soon as you stop feeling sorry for me, you won't want to be seen with me." "Are you girls all right?" It was Mrs. Hanson at the door. I scrambled up. Elsie lugged herself up, holding on to her skirt. "Here, Jennifer," Mrs. Hanson said briskly. "Give me the pin, and I'll fix Elsie's skirt. You go on back to class." I felt things were unfinished between us, so I lingered a minute. But Mrs. Hanson turned her back on me and started pinning Elsie's waistband. At recess, the kids clotted up into groups and began going over to Elsie. I noticed Mary Ann back off toward the tether ball and start swinging it by herself. She was the only one who cared about Elsie's feelings. "Why are we all standing around raking over Elsie?" I demanded. "What's so interesting about this?" Sharon looked at me surprised. "Skirts don't fall off every day in school, you know, Jenny." "Well, how would you like yours to fall off? How would you like the whole class laughing at you?" "I don't spend all my time eating," Sharon told me. "Her skirt didn't fall off because she was eating," I informed Sharon. "It fell off because she wasn't eating." "You mean because she couldn't eat," Diane put in. "That's right," I said. "She gets jailed in the office every recess for the whole semester. I never heard of anyone getting punished that long. Did you ever hear of anyone getting punished that long in this school, Sharon?" "I never heard of anyone stealing so much." Sharon was getting mad. "Okay, so she did. She can change. I remember you wet the bed in 3rd grade, and you were afraid of sleeping over at Diane's house. Do you still wet the bed, Sharon?" Sharon's face turned bright pink. Her nostrils turned white. She was really mad now. I stalked over to the tetherball and asked Mary Ann if she wanted to play. I felt bad for the rest of the day. I didn't want to fight with my friends. I didn't want Sharon to be mad. I didn't want to take that report card home. I watched Elsie sitting at her desk reading and yanking on her hair. It was an ugly, ugly day. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe so that you can listen to the next chapter. Thanks. Goodbye.